As you move into the post-deal stages, I think you also need to have the strategies in order to retain the talent that you want to retain, the key talent, right? Sometimes it just breaks down like a deck of cards, right? You have people leaving one after another, and then suddenly you have nobody that knows this system that has been developed for last 10, 20, 30 years.
Quick intro here. Vinod Uniyal has a long career in business development by roles in a variety of global companies. To name a few, but honorable mention from his journey, he negotiated and managed multi-million-dollar client relationship at TCS, the Tata Consultancy Services, and handled the project end-to-end. He led the business development in the Asia-Pacific region at Ericsson, building the business from scratch to an annual and very impressive $25 million USD. Worked at IBM, role leaderships, including the CIO partner, leading a team of thousands of people, and today he's senior vice president CAS Software, where he focuses on developing and expanding the advisory business. Vinod, you're kind of a rock star on the North American technology and software acquisition scene, guiding the different PEs and consulting firms, strategic clients in valuing and acquiring new assets. So thank you for being with us today.
How do you describe the nature of your activities with your clients, with your partners in M&A? How do you, navigate these complexities in relationship?
Having been working with dozens of advisories, 100+ deals. So generally what happens is I am directly working with the M&A advisory firms who are in turn serving their private equity, venture capital or strategic corporate clients, right? Now, in this process, I sometimes get to work with the PE firms as well directly, right? So sometimes the advisory would ask us to pitch along with them in order to win the deal. That happens quite a lot. At other times, I am helping our advisory partners uncover risk in the underlying software products that they are trying to acquire, and then post-deal optimize the software investments for their client. In addition to that, I would say that the M&A environment is quite complex. Indeed, I would say very, very complex. There are so many parties that work together. They are collaborating while they also want to maintain the confidentiality of the information that they are dealing with. So in my view, in this complex process, it is good to have a process in place. It is good to have people who are experienced in M&A, as these people become familiar with the language and the ways of working.
So from your perspective, how significant would you say cultural integration is when it comes to challenges in doing post-merger integration in M&A? Can you provide some examples?
Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. So in my view, cultural integration is one of the most significant factors for the success of the deal. Now, I can't talk about the recent deals that I have been exposed to due to the confidentiality of those deals, but at the same time, I can actually talk about a very old experience that I have personally had as a consultant, right? So it is almost 15 years ago. I was in Nordics and I was working with Tata Consultancy Services at that time. My client was NSN, Nokia Siemens Network, and I was helping NSN on a global payroll consolidation program. So what happened was after the merger, both entities had their own payroll providers in 100+ countries. And now after the merger, they definitely had duplicates and a very complex nature of this payroll provider relationship, right? So the goal of the program was to consolidate the payroll providers, go through the security checks once again, sometimes replace the providers with a new provider, just to bring synergy in the overall payroll integration program. Now in this program, what I noticed directly was that Nokia and Siemens Networks both were very, very different companies, having very different culture. One coming from the German side, led from the German side, and the other company was Finland based, right? And what I was able to see that the expectations were different. The people from the Siemens networks generally had this tendency to be, I would say, very, very detailed oriented, and like they needed instructions for each and everything, right? So if you want to even move from point A to point B, they would want step by step by step by step directions, right? Whereas the Finnish culture was a little bit more lenient, open-minded. So I could see those clashes, as this new entity was still in the making. And I think that was kind of also delaying the things on the ground. So that is one of my direct experiences that I would like to talk about.
Then, just to switch gear a little bit, when it comes to cultural integration and its repercussions, especially on talent retention, you know that keeping people and keeping the talents in the organization is of highly importance, and especially in business, especially in software. And this is so because of many reasons, because you have direct costs, of course, hiring for the people, you have to train them, you have to find the right talent, and then also because of a lot of indirect costs, meaning, for example, knowledge loss. You also have to deal with a decreased productivity for the remaining staff, and then the opportunity costs. So the question here is, how do you tackle that? How do you make sure that you don't lose your key talent? And if that's the case, how do you make sure it doesn't depend on the current stage of the process, pre-deal, post-deal, and especially in the PMI integration, how do you make sure you do not lose your talents after an acquisition?
That's a great question, Matthew. In fact, I've had the fortune of working in the talent development arena for quite some time. So I'm quite exposed to this question of how to attract, retain, and build the talent. So in case of M&A, I think one of the most important things is to really understand the current talent in the target company that you are going to acquire. And specifically, I would go from a software perspective. If you can really understand the top contributors, the people who have contributed to the code most, who have been in the system for a very long time. So the people who are like really key for you, right? As you acquire the company, the people who understand the software platform, and can build on that, right? So having those insights is a very, very important piece of information for you, right? That's the first thing. But beyond that, as you move into the post-deal stages, I think you also need to have the strategies in order to retain the talent that you want to retain, right? The key talent, right? And you can devise those strategy in very different ways. Sometimes it is some sort of the shares that you can give them, or align the reward strategy accordingly, so that the people who, when they are becoming part of the new organization, they actually get the right recognition, the value that they bring to the new organization, right? Because what happens in many of the cases is, if you do not recognize their contributions, they are suddenly finding themselves into under a new leadership and in a new culture, a new ways of working. I mean, it could feel, I would say, daunting. Sometimes it's a big shock that comes to people, and sometimes it just breaks down like a deck of cards, right? You have people leaving one after another, and then suddenly you have nobody that knows this system that has been developed for last 10, 20, 30 years, and now you have a problem at your hand, right? So I think, just summarizing all of it, initially understanding the talent dimensions, the people who are key contributors, and then devising strategies to retain those talent is important.
Are you aware of the recent acquisition of VMware by Broadcom? And especially here, it has completely reshaped, in a way, the IT infrastructure landscape. First of all, because massive layoffs have already started at VMware, and it has also impacted all the relationships that they have with suppliers, with customers. So the question that we have here is more an open-ended one. So what are your thoughts on it?
No, absolutely. I think it's a good question. So I won't talk specifically about the scenario that you mentioned, but I think what you're saying is that at times when the software companies get acquired by somebody else, does it change their relationship? Yes, it does actually. So we have seen many examples where pure software companies are actually acquired by larger companies or companies who are more interested in the services side of the business, right? And they would just embed them into their own services. Now, what happens is earlier in the past, there were other service providers leveraging this software. They suddenly become competitor. Maybe for some time that relationship can go on, but it is very difficult to continue with that relationship, because now you'd start competing with others, right? And the service providers who are using this software, they actually cannot use it with the same independence that was available earlier, right? So in my mind, there are certain software companies which are better off remaining independent, but of course, I mean, these are the market forces which drive things, and it's not in your control. But at the same time, I would bring another example here, which is quite fresh in my mind. So think about IBM acquiring Red Hat, right? Now, when IBM acquired Red Hat, these questions were being asked, right? I mean, Red Hat was working with AWS, Microsoft, and many other partners. So when this question was asked to the CEO of IBM, the answer, which I still remember very clearly, was that we will retain Red Hat as an independent company so that they are able to work with multiple partners who could be competitors in other situations to IBM. So it's like co-opetition situation, right? In some cases you are competing, in other cases you are partnering, right? So I think this is the ecosystem that we all are moving towards. And yeah, we would have similar situations like IBM Red Hat in the future as well.
Yeah, it has been the case also. You've probably seen like this story in the news. It's kind of old now. It was between Disney and Pixar. They did exactly the same thing as IBM and Red Hat. They just kept the entity completely disparate and incorporated the processes that would benefit both of them. Do you think that the solution to the merger and acquisition would just be to let the entities separated in every cases, or do you think you have scenarios, and what would be the elements you could identify to understand if it would be better to just like keep them apart, or to actually perform a real merger and to completely bind the two entities in software?
Yeah. So I think it would be a typical consultant's answer here. It depends, and it really depends. In some cases, it would make sense to let that acquired entity be independent and work their way, but while you are optimizing other backend things for them, but you're not changing the strategy, the positioning of the company and all that, like you gave the Disney Pixar example, right? It's a great example. But in some other cases where your thesis actually depends on acquiring this entity and then embedding it into some other, merging with some other entity, or making it part of a larger platform, then that's your thesis, and you're gonna go with that, right? So really it depends is the right answer here. Depending on the situation, what the goals of the M&A are, you would go accordingly.
Can you tell, based on the profile of the clients you're working with, if they're a good fit to be like completely merged? Like, could you feel it like in terms of maybe personality, in terms of like habits, processes, or not?
Yeah, I think the first parameter that you want to look at is the if you're talking about product companies here, for a moment, just to keep it simple, if you're thinking about product companies, then it depends on what your future vision is, right? What do you want to do with that product? Does this product actually make sense to be merged with something else that you already have, or the platform that you have, right? And then, of course, if that is the case, then you have to deal with the other aspects of the merger to make it successful. The other aspects will be the leadership, the people, the cultural integration, and all of that. But at the same time, in the past, I think there have been several examples of successful merger as well. I mean, there are multiple examples like that. In fact, I'm just going to switch gears here. So, I remember one personal example. It's not a software company, but a services company. It was a small software services company, maybe about 500 people or so, focused in India only. and it was acquired by a much larger company at that time, a French IT major, right, which was like 10,000, 15,000 people company. In my mind, that was a very successful merger. Uh, and over a period of time, that entity in India actually really became totally part of the French entity, and now they are inseparable, I would say. What I saw over a period of time was a lot of effort from both the leaders from the French side as well as the Indian side to create those opportunities where people got to work with each other. They had opportunities to understand the culture, and they were actually working in hybrid teams, and this all created synergy at the end, driving more business in the French market and delivering that business from India, from a lower cost base location, right? So I think that was a deliberate actions from both the leadership to make that merger successful, right? So I think there are examples on both ends.
I took note of a few things during this podcast, especially I think the principal one is how not understanding who you're working with can lead to delays, can lead to frustration on both sides due to miscommunications, different ways of working. And the key really here through like the different example Vinod gave us is empathy, to understand what the people you're dealing with needs, their vision, and be willing to take a step into their direction in order to move forward as a common like entity. If the vision completely differs, then you just have like to continue on your own way to take what's great for them. So very personalized approach. There is no one size fit all for such kind of deals, of engagements. That is something that you have to keep in mind when you're dealing with another company, because each company is unique, each culture is unique, and especially internationally. So Vinod, it was a great podcast. Thank you for sharing with us your experience. Thank you for sharing with us your ideas and point of view.
Thank you, Matthew and Hugo. Thank you for having me. Thanks for the opportunity.
Troubadour.